Hello and welcome to IELTS Immerse Speaking course. This is lesson number 1. We will see the overview and how you are graded in the speaking assessment of the IELTS course. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Rogers. I am British, currently living in Manchester, England. I've had lots of experience teaching English, not just IELTS preparation, but also business English, general English, and more recently, I've taught English for academic purposes. I've helped hundreds of students reach the IELTS band score that they require. Some students have come to me needing 6.5, 7, 7.5 for their university application, and I've helped them achieve those goals. I hope that you watching this will also achieve the same goals as my previous students. I like to be communicative, approachable, kind, motivating. I am ambitious, I am dedicated to the cause, and I do hope that you are too. As my motto goes, live with purpose, pursue with passion. Now, most of the time you will just hear my voice, but sometimes you may see me come onto the screen like here. Yes, hello. I am real and I am recording this live to you and many other students watching, so I do hope that you enjoy, but most importantly, find a lot of value throughout this course. I'll be back later. The course itself is 10 lessons, 10 comprehensive lessons to help boost your IELTS speaking score. Throughout the 10 lessons, there will be a focus on fluency, on vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. There are live lessons scheduled throughout the month. I will talk about this later on. I hope that by the end of this course you'll have a clear understanding of what is required so you can impress the examiner. Throughout the whole course you will see real and authentic questions to help you familiarize yourself with the test procedure. Here are the 10 course lessons. Today, as you see, we have the overview and how you are graded. But in other lessons, we will focus on how to improve your fluency, how to enrich your vocabulary, how to perfect the grammar, how to make sure that you are a master of pronunciation. And towards the end of the course, you will see that it's mainly about practice. Practice speaking in those topics that you'll be commonly asked questions about, but also a mock test, parts 1, 2, and 3. And finally, we'll do one mock test with all 3 parts together. As I mentioned, live lessons are available, so please do contact me later on if you do want to be involved in the live lessons. This is great for you to sort of get out of your comfort zone. I do encourage you to partake in tasks with other learners. It does help your confidence massively. That's the one thing that I would say more than anything else is you need the confidence, and going through these live lessons would certainly help you. When I'm learning another language, if I am put into another room of 5 other people that don't speak the same language as me, English for example, and I have to speak the other language I'm learning, it does help me, even if it's uncomfortable at first. If you are interested in live lessons, please do get in touch. If you are watching this alone, as private study, that's fine, but I do want you to try and be active as possible. So you shouldn't be passively watching this and just listening whilst eating your dinner. This is something that I want you to really enjoy doing. I want you to do every single task as it comes to you with a lot of effort, and the more you put into this, the more you will get out of it. Everything is there for you to get a good score in IELTS as long as you apply everything that I tell you over the next 10 lessons. So, the overview, and also how you are graded. Those are the main learning outcomes today. You are going to understand the 3 parts of the IELTS speaking test structure, and you will understand how you are scored or graded. So you'll understand the criteria when it comes to fluency, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. Throughout the course, you will be asked to do tasks. Now, each lesson, you'll have about 6, 7, or 8 tasks to do. Now, in the live lesson, there will be time for you to go into breakout rooms and discuss with other learners. If you are doing this course by yourself, I would recommend that you have a notepad with you and you write down the answer to your questions. Alternatively, I would not discourage you from speaking, maybe speaking to the computer, maybe recording yourself, maybe speaking into the mirror. However you like to do it, that's absolutely fine. But if you are speaking and answering these questions, you will benefit from this. This is task number 1. It is asking you 5 separate questions, and it's asking you about your knowledge about the IELTS speaking test before I inform you about it. You can now pause the video and answer those 5 questions. Once you have finished answering those questions, please return to the video. Ideally, I would give you 5 to 10 minutes to do this discussion. Welcome back to the course. Here I am again. Hopefully you have shared with yourself or with someone else the answers to those first 5 questions. But if you didn't know so much about IELTS and you're here because of that reason, that's fine. I'm now going to tell you everything you need to know about the fundamentals of the IELTS speaking structure. So IELTS is in 3 parts. IELTS part 1 is what they call the introduction and interview part of the test. It will be between 4 to 5 minutes and you'll answer 8 to 12 questions. Therefore, an answer of 15 to 30 seconds is ideal and certainly acceptable. You will be greeted by your examiner. They will provide some sort of identification check and they will introduce themselves briefly, and then it begins. They'll ask you some questions, maybe about your name or how you like to be called. They might ask you where you're from, and then the questions will get a lot more serious and they want you to respond in about 15-30 seconds per answer with about 2 to 3 sentences as a minimum. The common topics would usually include food and weather, hobbies. There's so many more, like relationships, studying, working. Occasionally there is a random topic, like I've seen exams before with topics about mirrors or keys. So do watch out for these types of part 1 questions, but most of the topics you can study and revise for, knowing that at least one of them will be asked throughout the part 1 of your exam. Just some tips for you: be polite, be friendly. That's good advice in all walks of life, but in this exam even more so. So be polite and friendly. That's good advice in all aspects of life, but even more so for an exam. Use this part to showcase your English language skills, so your pronunciation, your fluency, because later on it'll be harder to really show your highest level of skill doing it whilst answering the harder questions later on in the exam. So it's a good way to start part 1, showing that you can be fluent and answer questions and have a decent amount of vocabulary to know you understand the key topics. It is relatively straightforward, part 1. You should feel more at ease at this part more than any other part, even if you do feel nervous because it's the beginning of the exam. But in terms of the questions, you shouldn't find it too challenging. All the questions are personal. Be prepared to talk about yourself and your own ideas. So it will be about you. What type of weather do you like? What type of weather is in your hometown? What type of food do you like? Do you like cooking? So it'll always be about you. You don't have to speak objectively about a topic of cooking, for example. After part 1, you'll go into part 2, which is the long-term part of the tests, the cue card part, where you will receive a card with a question topic on it. Now, this is the only part of the exam where you have 1 minute to prepare your answer. So you have a look at the question and you have 1 minute to prepare, and you can make notes. Once you have prepared for it, you then speak between 1 to 2 minutes. If your answer is a little bit short, you may see the examiner do this. Let me show you. They may do this. They probably want you to continue if it's a little bit too short. Alternatively, they might ask you some follow-up questions very quickly to make you fill that gap and speak up to 2 minutes. Either way, 2 minutes is the maximum amount that you'll spend talking in this section. And to be honest, it is best to speak one full answer that will go to 2 minutes, to the point where the examiner will probably stop you. That's not a bad thing if they stop you, by the way. Every question in part 2 will have similar questions that you have to address. For example, where, why, how, when, who. It will ask you to talk about a situation, maybe talk about the past tense, I should say. But they could always be different. The topics will be quite similar to part 1 topics, but maybe they could be a little bit more complex. You may get a rare question, and the problem is sometimes it's not always easy to think of an example. But try to think of an example as soon as possible, so you can use that 1 minute wisely. And that brings us to the tips. Use the 1 minute preparation wisely. Write down key points, ideas. How would you structure your answer? If you have time, I also recommend writing down that vocabulary, because this is the only point in the exam where you can write down vocabulary that you could try to get into an answer. Everything else has to be more automatic. But with part 2, if there is an expression that you want to use to impress the examiner, if you write that down and say, I'm going to put this in my answer, that's a good time to do it, because you have time to write it down and prepare. Always think of examples, explanations, experiences, detail. This is what you need. Storytelling is key in part 2. Finally, we finish off with part 3, the discussion part of the exam. Now this one is about 4 to 5 minutes long, very similar to part 1, but you're asked half the amount of questions. You may even be asked just 4 questions throughout that 4 to 5 minutes. The average is 5 or 6. So every answer has to be in the region of 45 seconds to 1 minute long. This is more of a discussion. The examiner initiates a discussion, and it should follow on nicely from your part 2 section. So if part 2 is talking about cooking, describe a time where you cooked a nice meal for someone else, for example. Maybe part 3 would be further questions on cooking, or the industry of catering, or restaurants. It may be to do with this, but it's not asking more about you, it's asking more about, the topic itself. So in your country, does this happen? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this? So the questions will be more abstract, more complex, and it's harder to formulate your ideas and structure the answer coherently. But that's what I want you to try and do over the next 10 lessons. As it says on the screen here, justify your views, provide detailed responses. That's what we want you to do. My tips for you: provide thoughtful, detailed responses. Demonstrate your ability to discuss complex topics. A lot of students, they generally can do very well in part 1 and part 2, but what I don't like to see happen is part 3, students tend to freeze and panic, and they don't know what to say next. Sometimes the questions themselves have vocabulary which is a bit more advanced and difficult, and the student would just be like, oh, what was that just said? I don't understand the question. If this does happen, remember, you can always ask the examiner to repeat the question, okay? It's not a problem if you ask them to repeat the question. As it says on the screen, use a wide range of vocabulary and sophisticated language. So of course, this is what we want to do, but it is easier said than done. Here is task number 2. Please have a look at those 3 questions. Discuss or write down your answers to those 3 questions. These questions are asking you about your understanding of the IELTS speaking test. What do you find the most challenging? And how confident do you feel about taking the IELTS speaking test? If you are with someone else, feel free to have a conversation with them. If not, speak to yourself or write down notes as you watch this course. Once again, you have 5 minutes to do these 3 questions. Once you have finished, please come back to the video. Welcome back to the video. You've just answered 3 questions on your expectations, how you feel with the IELTS exam. So, let's move on to the next part of the lesson about the grading. How are you scored? What is the grading criteria when you're taking part 1, 2 and 3 of the exam? Are you aware of this? Let's have a look at these 3 questions. What aspects of your English do you think will be graded? What English speaking skill do you feel is the most important? And what do you believe brings down your score in IELTS? There's no right or wrong answer, really. It's just about giving your opinion. So once again, please take some time to answer those questions. You have between 5 to 10 minutes. As I said before, it is really important that you do engage in those tasks, that you do write down, that you do feel that you know where you are at the moment. It's very important. No one should ever, passively go through a course. You should really be determined every step of the way. So by doing all these tasks, every bit of practice will help you, I promise. What we see now on your screen is the band descriptors. And here are 4 bands that are graded when you are taking the IELTS speaking test. Those are the fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, pronunciation. Take a look at the fluency and coherence. Please take notes for anything that you feel is useful, but it's smooth talking, fluency. So we want to avoid that, what's that called? Yeah, that's it. Hesitation. It needs to make sense what you say. If the examiner doesn't understand the point of your sentences, then it's not making sense. That can bring down your score. Your speaking needs to be organized. There needs to be a beginning, middle and end to your answers, particularly part 2 and 3. No confusing jumps. If you're talking about something and then you lose your train of thought and then go on to something else, the examiner might be like, why did you start talking about this for? You were talking about something else before, now you're talking about this. It didn't flow, it wasn't coherent. So keep your conversation on track. Lexical resource. Now what is this? In easier terms, it's just another word for vocabulary. So of course, 25% of your speaking is graded on the vocabulary that you use. So make sure you use a variety of words throughout your answers. Don't repeat the same ones too much. Last night, I went to a cinema. I was watching an interesting movie. I thought the characters were incredibly interesting. And it was an interesting experience for me and my friend. I've repeated the word interesting too many times. Let's not have too much repetition here. Another thing is making sure your words are appropriate and accurate. So using the words correctly. Sometimes we like the sound of words and we want to get it into a sentence, but if it doesn't make sense, it's not a good word to use. Make sure you describe things well. So use those adjectives to help you describe, to express your idea, to do a little bit of storytelling. That's what we want you to do. You're also being graded on your grammatical range and accuracy. Of course, grammar is important in speaking. Maybe it's not the most important thing in speaking, but there needs to be a level of grammar that you're showing and it's helping you be understood in your fluency, for example. Now, grammar is crucial for that reason. So use it correctly. Making mistakes in grammar is expected to happen, so you don't need to be perfect in grammar. I've said on the screen here, no big mistakes. So big mistakes would prevent the examiner from understanding you. If you make a small mistake and say, I was in the bus, not on the bus, that's a small mistake and it's not going to stop you from getting the high scores in IELTS. It's a preposition, it's one word, it's one letter that is different. But if there is some grammar mistakes that you're making which stops the examiner from understanding you and you happens a lot throughout the test, this would be a problem. And also try to use different sentence structures. Don't just use simple ones. Try to use sentences that are more complex, compound sentences. Try to use different verb tenses, past perfect tense, future perfect tense. If you can do this all together, then that would be great for your grammar score. Last, but certainly not least, pronunciation. If your fellow listener, your fellow friend, or the examiner cannot listen to you, cannot understand you, then of course that is a problem. So your vocabulary knowledge may be amazing, your grammar may be perfect, but if I can't understand it because the pronunciation is wrong, then that brings down your grade as well. So make sure you say the words right, the sounds do matter, natural speech is fantastic, as close to a native speaker as possible, but you don't need to copy the accent. But if it is a neutral accent, that's absolutely fine. If it's clear, then it's okay. That's all you need. But when I say clear, what helps you being clear, maybe you have to change the tempo of how you speak. All these things that I've just mentioned, these 4 band descriptors, the next 4 lessons will help you improve on those aspects. Today is just an overview, just to know what you expect. But we will go into more detail of how you can improve on these areas. Because you may be thinking now, how do I improve my pronunciation? I struggle with grammar. How can I improve my grammar? Don't worry. Throughout this course, you will be assisted in every single area. So, let's do a bit of self-assessment. How would you grade yourself? Which aspect of speaking in English do you feel most confident about referring to those 4 band descriptors? And of those 4, which do you want to improve the most? Welcome back to the video. What is your weakest? What is your strongest point? If you're aware of it, then that's good. I'm happy that you are, because the first way of improving is by identifying where we need to improve. Anyway, next we're going to talk about the difference between a 5, a 6, and a 7. So what is the difference between a 5, a 6, and a 7? Well, if we look at those 4 pillar points, communication, vocabulary, detail, pronunciation, it's all quite obvious really. If we hesitate a lot, we may get a 5. If we have some hesitations and we have some pauses that are a bit unnatural, we may get a 6. If we have a very effective communication with very few errors, occasional errors, then we'll get a 7. It's as simple as that. With vocabulary, it's the same. If your vocabulary is very limited and you repeat words and you don't really show the depth of knowledge of vocabulary, you won't get more than a 5. But if you do show more, you can get a 6. And if you show an expanded amount of vocabulary, there's no reason why you can get 7 or more. Remember, later on in this course, you will know exactly what type of vocabulary that would help you. Detail as well. I want you to be expressive. I want you to talk in depth and develop your ideas. Always answer the questions of why and how, not just tell me what it is. So, detail, example, evidence, particularly in part 3 and to a lesser extent part 2, you need them to go into depth. So to get 7s, you will need those explanations. And finally, pronunciation. Can you be understood? Remember, as I said before, if your grammar and vocabulary is perfect but you cannot be understood, it's hard to get higher marks because you cannot be judged on your grammar if people cannot understand what you say. So that is the first thing that you have to really think about. Can people understand me? So here we are going to look at 2 answers. Okay? Not on this screen, but on the next screen you're going to see a few answers. How would you grade these answers? Okay? So we have 4 sections on the left, what you've just been referred to: fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation. So what would you score them? Between 4 and 8. Okay, so this is an example of a part 1 question. It's not really a question, it's really more of an instruction. Tell me about your hometown. Example 1 answer. I come from small town in the countryside. Peaceful, close with nature. There's small schools and shops, but not many job opportunities. People definitely friendly, and yes, I think we have festivals celebrating our culture. I think it's a nice place to live. Example number 2. I was born and bred in a small town in the countryside, and it is close to nature, so there is always a peaceful atmosphere. Also, there are some excellent schools here and a few local shops that are family run. However, job opportunities are rare, so people move out into the city. The people here are welcoming, and the community comes together to celebrate festivals. So I think it's a nice place to live. Take some time to grade these answers. Think of the criteria. I will give you 5 minutes at least to do this. Take your time. What score would you give them between 4 and 8? Welcome back. You have just graded those 2 answers. What did you give those answers? And why? Let me tell you what I would have done. I would have given the first answer, going back now, I would give this maybe a 5 or a 5.5. There is some good vocabulary there, but we want more. Okay, so festivals, celebrating culture, opportunities, I like that. But maybe there's not enough expressions here. Okay, we'll come to this in the vocabulary lesson, but maybe we want more different types of vocabulary. There are some issues with grammar. We don't say nice place for live, we say to live. They're small schools, we should say there are small schools. There's one or two others as well with grammar. So grammar not perfect, vocabulary could be advanced. Now the way that I spoke was a little bit of hesitation. We have and but and And because of this, maybe the fluency wouldn't have reached that 6th level either. And finally, the pronunciation. Now, I didn't want to put on a fake accent and do a bad pronunciation, so maybe the pronunciation was a little bit better. But based on the other 3, struggled to get more than a 6. So 5 to 5.5. Now, moving on to example number 2, this one is a better score, and I would say that it would just about reach a 7 or even a 7.5. The reason why we have born in bred, it should be born and bred. It's a mistake. However, the attempt to use that type of vocabulary is quite good, and maybe the examiner would give a 7 for that type of vocabulary. It's more native, it's idioms, it's a collocation. We also have some other vocabulary which is quite promising. We have peaceful atmosphere. We have, once again, celebrate festivals, community, welcoming. So generally, the vocabulary for a part 1 question is standard. We have a few expressions in there. We have a few advanced words in there. That's all we need. The grammar is so much better. Very few mistakes here. And the way that I was reading it was with a lot more fluency. A little bit of hesitation, but not a lot. So if you were to give this type of answer that was quite detailed and had a few vocabulary and expressions, it will get you a 7 for sure. Okay? Did you grade it similar? Did you grade it different? Don't worry if you graded it differently. But now you'll know that this is a 5, 5.5, this is a 7 or 7.5. So let's move on to 2 more answers. How would you grade the following 2? Exactly the same criteria as before. This is another question from part 1. What do you enjoy doing in your free time? Example number 1. Let me think. In my free time, I like reading books and watching movies. Reading helps relax myself, and I often get lost in a good story. I like it. Movies are another favorite because they allow me to unwind, maybe, and explore different worlds. Example number 2. I enjoy spending free time outside. I like going for long walks in the park or hiking in the mountains. I like to be in nature and it helps me clear my mind and stay active. I also like meeting friends for coffee and chatting about various topics. We like to hang out. These activities make my free time enjoyable and meaningful. So how would you grade those 2 scores? Welcome back. So what did you score those 2 answers? Now, these ones are a lot closer. So there isn't a 4 and an 8 or a 5 and a 7 in this one. They're both in the 6 range. Example 2, though, is better. Example 1, I would say, would just about reach a 6 or even a 5.5. There is some good vocabulary here, but the problem is there was a lot of hesitation in bringing out that word, unwind. Now, unwind is fantastic vocabulary, but it affected the fluency score because it took so long to remember that word. So you have to remember that when taking your speaking test. Is it worth remembering one word to drop your fluency? However, I would give this person a 6. Overall, I think the expressions are good enough. I think the grammar mistakes are very minimal. So I think it's generally a better improvement on the previous 5, and maybe it would get a 6. Example 2 would definitely get a 6. Probably would get a 6.5. He was speaking very quickly, as you may remember, and this is a reminder that the way that you speak and speaking quickly doesn't mean that it's a better answer. But if we look at the grammar and we look at the vocabulary, it's a very strong answer. The only thing that I would say is lacking that would not get a 7, we probably need some more expressions here. We do have hangout, but that's about it. But I would say that it's very close to get a 7. It may even reach it in most criteria, and if the pronunciation was very good, then it probably would reach a 7. Task number 7. Let's recap on today's lesson. So please read those 5 questions, discuss with a partner if you're with someone else, or discuss with yourself with the mirror, or write down in your notepad what you think your answers are to those 5 questions. What have you learned from the overview so far today? Well, thank you so much for doing that final task of today's first lesson of the course, and hopefully that you enjoyed it. Hopefully you found something useful. But before we finish, there is just a few more things that I have to tell you. Throughout the course, I want you to be doing self-study between lessons 1 and 2 and 3 and so on. So what you've learned today is the overview of the IELTS speaking exam and how you are graded throughout. And the next lesson will go into way more detail on what I want you to do in terms of your actual English language. But between now and then, what can you do to help you? So if I was to see you in a live lesson, how would you be prepared for the next lesson? Well, always do some self-study. Look at some questions and answers, real ones. If you head over to Immerse English website, you can see over 200 real questions with authentic answers from part 1, 2 and 3. But I like any type of content online. If you want to look at any YouTube channel, any other website for IELTS help, please go ahead and have a look. Read some questions, look at some vocabulary. Everything will help you. So review the notes you wrote down today and finally put it into practice. Test yourself, answer some questions. Between now and the next lesson, can you maybe answer 5 part 1 questions, part 2 questions? It's all up to you. Whatever you decide to put into this is the result you get out of it. Thank you so much for listening today and watching the first video. I look forward to seeing you in part 2, or I should say lesson 2. Sorry, I'm already thinking of parts all the time. Let me just wave goodbye to you. Thank you so much again for joining this lesson. I'll see you in lesson number 2. Bye bye for now.